So if you minimize if you let the video go, then minimize this window so it doesn't see itself.
Oh yeah.
Then it'll be fine.
Yeah, no, that's fine, but I need this page open to see if anyone's joining. How does that Q&A work? Does it like pop up on my screen saying someone asked a question?
We're not sure yet.
Come on. And I need to know if anyone has joined. Where do I see that?
Well, I joined.
0 viewers.
This one is different.
I've joined, John.
Have you?
Yes.
I don't see you.
I've joined in person.
0 viewers.
Let me refresh my page and see. Here I come. This video is unavailable in restricted mode.
Yeah.
Here on YouTube does that. What's it talking about?
Just share the.
It's shared to the public, to everyone.
No, I don't know what's going on. I can't see anything. Well, that's what I get.
Did you stop it?
And if you go in there, nothing.
Then it gives me.
Nothing yet.
Gives me this.
I don't know if I click on the
Well, I'm not sharing my screen yet, so I
Okay.
don't know if you're in.
Uh,
Share my screen.
But it,
Now?
I get the YouTube link, which shows me a broken screen.
Yeah. Maybe this is only available in the UK, I don't know.
But we tested it.
No, I've got it here.
You got
Is
it.
it okay?
You see my screen there.
Yeah, it's like the latest.
Oh, you're seeing the.
Is that on YouTube? Okay, great. So welcome.
You like?
Yeah.
So how do I get an indication if anyone is listening to us? Who is going to join remotely?
I would.
Who do we know?
We don't know.
We don't know. How do I see that? There must be a place where I can see it.
So you.
James says Hangouts.
Do
Yeah, you can see there. So people
just
don't
try to copy the link and put it
Yeah.
in.
see them down there.
Down here.
So,
Okay, great. So
stuff over here. Awesome. I believe.
oh, okay. So here I'll see.
Yeah. Other faces or.
Just hearing your voice everywhere.
Why is this link not working?
John,
What did you just click on the play thing?
Yeah. It's live. It says like that.
Oh, you clicked on live. It's still giving me this restricted thing. Videos under.
They know what you have ticked on.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a technical issue.
A little bit. Is your mail?
I don't think we got this right for a single talk. I attended a single one where the whole Hangout story worked.
Okay.
I've watched one of the Hangouts on YouTube, and I like that.
So the YouTube one works great. And I watched one of them the next day off YouTube, and that works great as well.
It's not like the live share,
But
but
the
that's
live
fine.
should,
I can see it now.
yeah, that's right. So the only thing with the YouTube is like if somebody asked a question from the room, whoever's closest to the microphone needs to repeat the question and then answer it. Otherwise,
That's why we're using this thing now. We haven't used this for the other sessions.
I'm trying this thing. I just
Yeah.
don't know if it's working. I need someone to maybe.
But we'll see by the end of the session.
Can you monitor?
How do they ask questions usually in the previous sessions?
They
How
have
is the keys ask questions?
nobody has, but typically we monitor the Hangouts message. So by the Hangouts message board, that they'll,
This chat room here.
the chat room should pop up with a text message. Am I right?
Yeah, that's what.
So we don't have anything yet.
Yeah, so like when we did it live last time.
oh wait, go back.
But when we did it live
There
last,
at the top. You are screen sharing. Present to everyone.
That's not what I'm doing.
Oh, but that's just the screen. Okay, never mind.
So I want to
My
present
bad.
to everyone. Okay, so let's just start. Can you guys at least see this on the YouTube, my screen? I've
Yeah.
shared it.
Is Is it delayed or?
Yeah. It's about a minute or so.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Let's get started. So I haven't really prepared much because I have other work to do apparently. So I'm just going to follow this guide. Luckily, I do know a little bit about it, and I know there's some experts around the table as well who can help me out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through that example code base that you guys hopefully downloaded and look at this style guide here from John Papa. He is an Angular evangelist, or whatever you call him these days. So I guess he knows quite a bit. And then we can just discuss it. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of opinions, and I hope we'll get to better knowledge after that. So I'm not going to start at the very top. I'm starting here way down. This is on one of the links I emailed. It's just a style guide from John Papa. I'm going to start here at the bottom because I think that makes much more sense to start with your application structure. So what's that about? All right, so he's talking about something called the lift principle. So the lift principle is about 4 things. Lift is locating your code easily. So what he's trying to do there is arrange your app in a folder structure where it's very easy to find something. So he calls it feature-based folder structure. Another folder structure is an example that you guys might have seen. It's where you say, all right, I have controllers, and all your controllers are in there. I have views, I have directives, that's the technical sort of layout. But what he's talking about is a feature layout. So that means when you open up your app folder, what you'll see there is immediately, what is this app about? So you can immediately see this app's about Avengers. There's a dashboard view, there's some widgets. So immediately you understand, or you have some idea what the system is doing. And I really like this way of arranging features. So that's the first principle, is just being able to locate something quickly. So if you need to work on the Avengers view, or you need to work on something on a dashboard, it's very easy to find. It's app, there you go. All the stuff I need to do is in dashboard or in Avengers, everything is there. We've used this structure for AFCRI. And I must say, we started out with the controller and the view structure, and we went to this feature one, and I really like it. I think the locate one, that's good, but the best one for me would be the identify. So, okay, maybe it's still locate, I don't know, but inside the Avengers folder, you have your view, the HTML, you have your JavaScript. You might have other stuff in here. Maybe there's a directive that's only used for Avengers. But the nice thing is everything is in one folder. While in the controller view type folder structure, it was pretty hard to find. I need to go to this folder. There that is, this folder. Yeah, I can only have one folder open, and everything I need to change stuff to Avengers is right there. Okay.
Good app opener.
Okay, sorry. Maybe call that your real admin. Okay, so that's the locate and the identify. I think identify is more about, so when you look at a specific file, you know exactly what you'd expect there. So I think that's more evident by looking at, maybe if you go to the core, you see, all right, constants. I'm going to get some constants in there. This is going to be a data service. And when you do things like a factory or a module, you see, we'll call it dashboard module. So just by looking at the file, you already know a little bit. You know, what is this about? What is it going to do? And I think that's what he means with identify. You can go read more, and I'll ask you guys right now. The flat structure, that is not having too many folders within folders. So you can see inside Avengers, we don't have a folder here now called views. Everything is just there under that structure. So I think a good way to do this is to start as flat as possible, and as soon as you need a folder, and think hard about, do you really need a new folder? Yeah, and then it's okay to create another one, but start as flat as possible. I think that's the idea there, and try to stay dry. So you'd ask, why try? Why not just be dry? I think he says if you want to be dry and these 3 items will be compromised by doing dry, then rather not do it. There's an example here at the bottom. I'll just read it. He says it best. Being dry is important, but not crucial if it sacrifices the others in the lift, which is why I call it T-dry. Where's the example? Yeah, I don't want to type session view.html. Why not? Because HTML immediately means it's a view. So there you don't need to do view. So you can keep dry there. You don't need to double type something there. So that's an example. So I don't know. What do you guys think about the lift principle?
Is this in general for Angular type apps, or is this just in general? Like if I am going to write a C app?
Yeah. I think, well, here it's only for Angular, but maybe you could do it in other apps. I saw a video from Robert C. Martin the other day where he talks about architecture, where he discusses this. He talks about specifically MVC applications. It's this one. So, well, about architecture. So the nice thing that he says is, if you look at the MVC app, you typically have this view controller structure. Think about ASP.NET MVC. And he has a huge issue with that. He tends to work this feature. And there he was talking about any architecture. The whole point is, when you open up an app for the first time, you should know what is it about. Rather, so that feature view is better. So I think you could use it everywhere. It's just harder, I think, in ASP.NET MVC, because you need to change the routing a little bit before that will work. But I'd say try do lift everywhere.
I agree. I think so. Look, I mean, we have to try that in our code, why not in our folder structure? Because the code should read as well. Right? That's our point. Our whole argument that we had over the last week.
Yeah.
That toss up between comments, where to comment and how to comment. So I think it's very similar. Whereas like we don't exactly have a place to comment on our files besides for maybe documentation. But and also when your thinking process, I think, changes a lot when you're writing like this.
Yeah, you're right.
Because you're breaking it down into.
Is there something on that point that you do up front, or do you like have some kind of a definition and then you now reorganize into lift, or do you start off with lift environment?
I think the next time I'll start lift. We have to start somewhere. So what we tend to do is developers, we start with the controller technical one. That's how we start. And our development actually, it was hindered by that because it was hard to find stuff. And that's when we said, all right, let's move to lift. So it could arise or emerge out of an issue you're having. But I'd start with lift and then maybe move to another one if you need to. Although moving is pretty hard, so I don't know.
I like the feature-based thing. I really like, because in general you work on a feature. So you want all the stuff for a feature together. You don't want to go controller for account opening. Now I have to go to the view for account opening. Now I have to go to the directive for account opening on the screen. You want all the account opening stuff together.
No, you don't think that way, do you? You think, I'm going to do something to the dashboard, not I'm going to do something to the controller.
Yes, exactly. You never. Then you need to go find the controller. You need to. So I like the mind shift change. That's also, it fits in with the Scrum methodologies and the Agile stuff. We work on features. We don't work on controllers. Yes, you work on controllers, but that's because
they belong to a feature.
No, that's a very good point. You keep the value in mind.
Exactly. Yes. Plus, you can show it. You can have one of your clients, Jan, you can sit him down next to you and say, here's the project. Look here, I'm going into here. Here's the thing if you wanted to show you some stuff. It's nicely organized the way they understand it, which I think it's good.
Just to answer your question, Sasha. I think it's very doable from the beginning. So I've got two comments to make. One around you started up front. I'm working on a little personal project, and I started from it's the Ionic Seed project or whatever. And there they've got the classic controller or whatever. And you know, now that I've been working with a lift style on this other project, I know how much cleaner it is. And I spent 2 hours like moving so I prototyped something, it looks good. I spent 2 hours to like just reshuffle it, and it feels much better, but it's a tiny code base. You know? So I think starting early is something that I think you should do. The danger is with all these Yeoman and whatever projects out there at the moment, none of them seem to be doing this, which is weird to me. And maybe it's because they're able to explain the controller concepts, and you know, if that's their objective and that's what they've got, then it makes sense to me. But there's a big red flag for me. It's like, why the hell don't we see more of these projects as seed projects and Yeoman projects like this to begin with? So to answer your question, I think it is a good idea to start early. My second comment is I've worked on big code bases where we converged, so not on Angular, but like just .NET C# code. And we converged to the same conclusions after many years. And it's like, you know, we need to take this painful knot to get rid of some technical debt, some structure debt. And every time we've been like so much happier, like as a team. It's like, God, you know, it feels cleaner, it feels nicer. I know where stuff is. When I'm bugging, I know it's just this one place that's affected. So I think this is relevant in general, but I'd say the worst mistake is to carry on like a real production project on the starter template structure. And the thing is, we have 2 code bases that I've seen where that's happened. And we've taken the knock now to undo it on the one. We're going to have to take the knock on the next one because I think it's working against us now. It really is complicated to find stuff in those big production bases.
That's, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, also one thing, you know, it doesn't mean like if you do the outside layer by feature, you have to do the inside by feature. Maybe it's more sense by type, but we kept it by feature. So we had a dashboard where there was a lot of stuff, you know, so we had done the first layer by feature. Then once we had done, then we had gone and cleaned up this and done it by feature. It also just became so much easier to find stuff. So something's gone wrong with some widget feature. Is it the outside? No, it must live in one of these. And it's a lot quicker to find it.
So it's like sub-feature or feature.
So I mean, you've got to be careful not to go too deep, but which I was starting to do because and I realized, but like it's still just that those by feature separations make sense.
But on that, even why it's good to so you'll see this one folder with a lot of detail in it. Why I like this is because that usually corresponds to the most complex part of your system. And it's like, that's exactly the message you want to paint. You know, to identify story. Right?
That's good.
It's like, oh, where's the complexity? Let's just look for the biggest folder.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, okay, perfect. Then
I think it does map like that. I think you're right. Let's take a look at AFCRI quickly, because there's some interesting thing I saw there.
What Daniel was talking about is exactly like the hardest part of our app is that dashboard thing that we then broke up. And it's obvious from the code.
So our most complex one is payments, as you can see there. So I think you're right, it does map like that. So maybe admin is our most complex. So I think what we should have done here is probably what you say, Daniel. The whole admin section could then be a new feature inside of that, because this is getting out of hand.
Yeah, that's exactly what we had, and it becomes hard to read through that, even just trying to scan for files.
But there's that other rule, like 7 files per folder type guy somewhere.
Yeah, try to keep it as flat.
Which for me kicks in at that point. It's like, oh, that's a bit. And that's what you were pushing on our side, and it really did. It did help after Daniel cleaned that part. So I like it. I think it works well.
So interesting thing I want to point out to you guys, give me a minute, is if you look at the AFCRI story map and you look at our features, how related they are. So let's go to the accounts story map. Unfortunately, this is phase 2. I don't have phase 1 here, but we had here in phase 1, there was logging, accounts, payments, transfers. Those were the items we had there. And if you look at our features here, you can see accounts, you'll see transfers, receive payments. So it maps nicely to your story map, which means immediately, just by looking here, I know what the value is. Okay, so that's the first one, guys. It's this lift principle. You can read up more about it if you want to. So then he starts talking about application structure. So overall guidelines, have a near-term view and a long-term vision. In other words, start small, but keep in mind where the app is heading down the road. All of the app code goes into a root folder named app. All content is one feature per file, each controller. So I think, if I'm right, what he's doing here is, even though your app is still small at the beginning, and there's only like 5 lines of code in this one controller, I mean, that's fine. Still keep it one feature or one task per controller, even though the controller is very small, because you don't know where you're going. And maybe later that controller will grow bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think it's good advice to start with this all content is one feature per file thing. Even though you feel like you're creating a lot of files, you don't know where it's going to end up. And if I take AFCRI again, that was my experience. We started and it was so small, the controllers, that we said, let's just have all of them for this feature, all the controllers in one file. And in the end, it was a mistake, because now that files, you can ask how many, it's very big files. While it would have been better to have one controller per file, and then call the file name something that's easily identifiable. So you can easily find the controller, and the controller file itself isn't too big.
A practical thing I've kind of discovered, which I don't see mentioned often, but for me it actually adds a lot of value. With the small files, when you're looking at the deltas, it's a lot more obvious in terms of what's changed. It's like, for this bug fix, does it make sense that A, B, and C was touched?
Oh, okay.
And you can see that because of the structure. Whereas if it's in one big one, like the chance of merge conflicts and formatting changes, 2 spaces, 4 spaces.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes.
More merge conflicts.
Very good point.
Also, to do code review or a bit of quality control about what goes into a release, you can see, hang on, why is that counts controller or that counts whatever controller, why is that changed for this release? I don't remember. And either it is something that didn't need to happen, or it was somebody just checked it in because they fiddled in the file and people just do check in all.
Yeah, I love that.
Which is all things that are very close to what
it's not.
I haven't even thought about that.
Yeah, it's like
That's great. So I don't know if there's more here, Luke, maybe that you guys have seen about overall. I think that's the only thing I really get out of what he's saying there. He's also talking about Bower component scripts and library. I'm not sure what he means. I don't write them, so I don't want them cluttering up. All third-party vendor scripts are stored in another root folder. So separate your app stuff with like the Bowers of the world. That makes sense, doesn't it? Find more details and reasoning behind the structure. So if you want more about overall app, you can read that. Let's just look at each of these. Layout. Place components that define the overall layout of the application in a folder named layout. Okay, so what he's talking about here is important. Sometimes it's not a feature. You get stuff that's either shared amongst all your features, or it's more sort of plumbing type code, and that's okay. Like here he has layout. So everything concerning layout he has there. He even has something like core, which is his data services. And I guess you can debate that, but I mean, that's all your features use this file here. All of your features need to do data. So here, it's a good way. You're sort of breaking the feature view here, aren't you? Because now you're saying data. This is a way to get data. But I think it's good to point out that sometimes, yeah, it's going to be like that, especially for shared features and things like layouts. And I think it still makes sense to have it. You know?
Is it fair to say that then this is, in a sense, driving your architecture? Because if you're going to break it up into features and then core and shared, you're going to organize your entire design in that way. It's kind of pushing you. That's what the focus is going to be inevitably as a result.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Definitely will influence how you architecture and design. Just like doing unit tests first influences how you architecture your app. This might also.
The this layout distinction for me, it's great that, he's the first guy to acknowledge the fact that there's like, it's not a feature, but it's so critical. So like the shell concept is really nice for that. But what the distinction makes me realize, and this is what we did end up with, just like you have a very layout UI-centric division next to your feature divisions, there's also a domain-driven division on the other side, which makes sense. So it's like the domain concepts, like, so he's got data as service in port. Maybe he just has one piece of data that he's interested in. But I found having your domain concepts as modules alongside your features and alongside the layout then kind of covers all of it. So you might, so in our case it's a trade feed. We have a trade feed module, and that guy handles all the communication. Like that's our model layer. And then we might have other like widgets that display trade feed information, and those will be separate modules. Like those are the features in my mind. But then there's like one guy who's the master for everyone else around trade feed anything. And then so the layout, feature, and domain concept sort of lines fit nicely together.
So I would suggest, rather than having everything in one file again here, I'd almost go to a repository pattern. So say what something you need is, say, users. Yeah. So I'll call it maybe a user service. And then it doesn't matter where you get that data. It can come from SSO, it can come from your SAP system, or wherever. I mean, that you can then roll out. But then this call, or you could call it data, I don't know. You get a bit more information. This is not just data. I mean, what data? This doesn't tell me a lot. I like to say users data, or this is the, and there might be payment data. I think you can improve that a little bit.
And at that point, you can drop the word data, because if it's a payment, it's a payment.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, I could.
That's an example of keeping it in one module. That's the full module. But from a mocking perspective, it's very easy in Angular to swap out entire modules.
Okay.
So if you have a payment module, which is like your interface to everything, you can mock just that guy out.
Yes.
And then all your other widgets kind of can be unit tested a bit better. I don't know if we do enough unit testing, but I think if we emphasize it more, then it would be a real benefit. But to swap out pieces of one module is not so easy.
Okay, so that's what he's talking about there. Folders by feature, that's really just what we said. If you look at his benefits, the developer can locate the code. Now we talked about that. Lift helps reduce the app from becoming cluttered through organizing. Now we talked about that. And there are a lot of files, 10 plus, locating them is easier with consistent folder structures. I think that might be an important point, is to try and be consistent, at least if you picked something, if you picked feature, just try and stay consistent with that. Talked about all that. Okay, next one, any questions about what we've talked about now? Modularity. So first thing there is many small self-contained modules. Very small modules that encapsulate one responsibility. That's the one responsibility concept. Everyone knows what that is. Okay, so that's modularizing everything. So why? Modular applications make it easy to plug and go, as they allow the development teams to build vertical slices of the applications and roll them out incrementally. This means we can plug in new features as we develop them. What's he talking about there? Anyone have an idea? So here's my take, which might be completely wrong. But if you look at how Facebook, for example, handles go-lives, they'll have a lot of go-lives incrementally. And there might be as many as more than one a day. But what they do is, when they develop a feature, they'll almost try to contain that feature. so that the user can't see it. They call it toggles, and it works pretty interesting in their world. They could toggle off a feature only for a certain group of people or only for a country. And that's how they actually test, and they're using the users. So they'll roll out a feature, it's in the code, but it's almost switched off. And then as soon as they feel, all right, all the things are, maybe they're waiting for an integration point. I don't think Facebook is, but you can imagine your own projects. So you are reliant on a mainframe system, and the feature you're developing is waiting for a new version of an integration into that system, right? So the question is now you both need to go in at once, because he needs to have his part ready, you need to have your consumer part ready. But if you do it this feature way, you can switch it off. They're still using the old way until the mainframe says, right guys, we've deployed our new version, then you can just switch on. So you've deployed long ago and you just switch on the feature. So I think what it means is if you develop in a modular way and it's self-contained, it's easier to do that. It's easier to switch features off and on because everything's, you can plug in the new version of the integration point, plug it out. And that's what he's talking about, I think.
To add to that, it's this plugin part which I find most valuable. In terms of like it driving your architecture, this is one of the things where it drives an extensible architecture. Because now imagine you have a shell with some infrastructure part, and you want to be able to reveal a whole new thing by switching on the module. That shell needs a decent API for that module to like hook into. If it's if it's like a menu on the left, or in our case it's the menu, like the admin menu that pops. Like you want modules to be able to register themselves as, hey, I want a setting. So what that means is that you've got some base services that allow you to plug yourself into that, and then like that module can handle the UI for you, and then you just have to provide the view on the other screen or whatever. And so all I'm saying is, I like this because the plugin part of it leads to extensible architectures from the get-go. Because like, how do I switch this module off and it should all vanish? It's like, I need that API.
And that drives architecture differently. If you start with a unit test, you're going to have a self-contained module because you can't reach SAP, maybe SAP's your integration point. But if you've developed your module self-contained, you can almost mock out SAP pretty easily for your unit test. And that ends up designing a self-contained module. So I think self-contained is really important there, not dependent on other parts. You can plug it in. It's a pity it doesn't really have an example here. Great. Okay, create an app module, create an application root module whose role is pull together all of the modules and features of your application. So he's talking about, where is it in this app module here? So look what he's done is just put the whole Angular app module definition into a separate file. And that's where you pull everything together. So that's what he's talking about there.
That's just a module by itself again, right? So you can create, I'm just saying let's add dot module.
Yeah.
It's Angular.module.
Now that's where he defines his main module, and that pulls all the modules together. Look at it. This is one of his modules. App.core. App.reaches is one of his modules. So that's what he's talking about. Create modules for all your features. If you look at the core one, see it's again easy to find core module. So here he's modularized everything is in a self-contained module that's on core, and here's things like animate, ng-root, sanitize, plus things like your logger. So that's contained in one module. If you have spaghetti code, how would it look? You'd have logger in here. You'd have your ng-root in here. You'd have all those stuff in here. So what he's done is he's put it in one module called core module. Make sense?
Yeah. But blocks is his feature.
No.
Blocks.
Yeah, so blocks per exception, blocks that logger, that's app blocks.
Yeah. So he's contained all that. It could be his own stuff or other stuff, but it's all part of a core module. And he's just
Open up blocks and you'll see that's an example of the substructure. Open it up. Yeah, so that's an exceptional one in my mind. So normally if you have your features at the root level,
I would have been expecting personally that blocks falls under core, because you don't get to see blocks exposed on the root level where he's labeling all the modules. So the core module contains the blocks module, so I would expect the folder structure to follow the same paradigm.
just in terms of blocks, I could be wrong, but I think he uses the word blocks. It's those little pieces of code that we've all emailed to each other. Yeah, but core in my mind is the core of the app, and then the blocks is reusable pieces of
between
code.
apps. Yeah, that like synthesis is blocks. Everyone can use this Logger block, not only this app.
Yeah, but I would then I would say that needs to be a module. If it's something that's across the company needs to build a package.
Yeah.
You say reference. So I'm also
Agree.
What I don't like about this. So go to the construct. Yeah, the core module.
Core module.
Okay, so firstly, my first issue is that we've got app.core. Okay, so that I'm okay with. But it is in the file core.module.js, so that to me is already like, then I'd like that module name to be app.core.module or something that does the whole path. Then you look at blocks. Now that's not apps.blocks.exception. It's like there's a bit of a breakdown in the naming conventions there. But maybe that's just my sense of.
But it's just emphasis on like my code versus not the app one. There was a paragraph we read just now. I hear your inconsistency.
Yeah, but that's not.
But I'm wondering whether it's not just emphasizing like this is our code, this is not our code.
No, I don't think so. I think that's why there's
The consistency is the consistency is broken.
I hear, but I get your point about it, but I think the main idea I want to get across is you don't usually, when you start building an Angular app, put everything in modules like this. And I do like that tendency. Because otherwise your app module just gets out of hand. It's so big. It helps grouping the things in, and then you can reuse it also.
But can you, so if I now do stuff in the app portion, can app.widgets use the stuff that was included from app.core?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Because that's where I think it doesn't necessarily.
I learned the hard way that Angular doesn't hide detail. So like if I have a module, app.widgets, that depends on app.adventures. The other constants and factories and all those things that the other modules inject are actually accessible. So this just kind of gets the dependency order right, and that's all they use it for. So it's a bit bad in my mind, because I might have a factory called Luke's Factory, and that's defined in module A. What if some other third-party guy also called Luke has his module B called Luke's Factory? Not only do they clash, but the thing is that in my other module that doesn't depend on module B, I can actually access Luke's Factory whether I declare this dependency or not. So conceptually, it's useful to think that, like, okay, I shouldn't have access to stuff that I haven't explicitly depended on in my module. In Angular 1, it actually doesn't do that. There's this global bag that the stuff goes into, and this is just controlling the order in which stuff actually comes in. So it's just something to watch out. But app means you're going to have access to everything from everywhere if you wrote code in app. Just it's loaded everything right. next one.
Okay. The next one here is keep the app module thin. Only put logic for pulling together the app in the application module. Leave features in their own modules. Why? Adding additional roles to the application root to get remote data, display views, or other logic not related to pulling the app together muddies the app module and makes both sets of features harder to reuse or to turn off. The app module becomes a manifest that describes which modules help define the application. Just keep it thin, or if there's anything, no biggie in my view. Feature areas are modules. Create modules that represent feature areas such as layout, reusable and shared services, dashboards, and app-specific features. Okay, so he creates a module for layout or a module for customer. Self-contained modules can be added to the application with little or no friction. I just want to ask a question. So if you don't do it in a module, let's take one of his examples. It's a dashboard module. How would you do it if you don't do it in a module, Luke? So you would, I'm trying to compare what is he saying should not do, and
if you look at our apps, we'll have the app module with everything in there. So I think the whole point of this thing for me is actually you should have no code, nothing useful defined in the app module. It should all be in some other module, and app just depends on, that's what we're saying. Whereas, to answer your question, we would normally have gone and created a directives or a controller inside the app module, because that's the only module we've got.
All right. So if I think of AppGree, what we have is, we don't have dashboard. We have dashboard index and dashboard widget and dashboard disk controller, and he's saying just group all of that into one module called dashboard.
Yes, I think so.
So the other way of doing this would be,
So you've included each one in your app section. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, and everything.
You should include it in the
everything-
dashboard one, and then
Open up
include
the
the dashboard one.
and I wouldn't be surprised if he's done exactly this inside there.
Yeah.
And that's also fine.
Oh, well, at the dashboard, there's nothing.
But I didn't follow your arguments exactly. It's
Just trying to find the example quickly. I also don't know if I'm right. I've looked at this.
Look, for me, the gist of it is have lots of modules for all of these divisions. The modules are what you slice the app.
So let's-
That's just a composition of modules. That's essentially what it is.
That's what we say.
App doesn't, or the app module is a composition of modules, which then makes up the app, which is the actual application. In fact, if we call it app, it's just because that's how it always gets called.
And then the app should have nothing in it that's,
So for example, you could have two views. One view that uses the client app portion that has got just client stuff in it, and then you've got an admin one that uses the client one, the side one, and the admin module is just an extra thing that can add in, it's composed a little bit differently from the two. That's how I understand it.
Look, there's a refactoring value in this as well that we went through. So imagine the spaghetti ball of mud or of code. To try and unbundle this thing later is really difficult, and it took us a long time again to kind of unbundle that down. And that's what this approach forces, I suggest you do up front, because it's much easier when you're writing it for the first time to say, of everything, I only want A, B, and C, not the whole alphabet. And you're encoding that for the next guy down the road. So when you're going to refactor the whole architecture or something, or just maintain it, it's really clear. Okay, I just have to make sure that A, B, and C is in place or marked out correctly, and the rest I don't care. Why? Because the guy who originally designed this thing said he doesn't care. Whereas the one module thing, you have nothing to help you do.
Okay, now it makes sense. That's one of the areas I'd like to investigate a bit more. Reusable blocks are modules. Create modules that represent reusable application blocks for common services such as exception handling, logging, diagnosis. So he's talking about those blocks. Yeah, Luke. So I agree with Johan here. If you're going to do something that's reusable across apps, that should really be a Bower component or a. Yeah, I think so.
I think so. A caution though, because I tried this at the last company. The big lesson that I learned was, well, there's actually two types of developers. Ones that are library writers and ones that are library consumers. Okay? And there's far fewer library writers. So I think you need guys who are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to put the extra effort to make a nice library.
Yeah.
And the other one, which is the implicit, well, the dependencies you create across projects.
Yes.
Because then it's like, this guy picks up the bag for this project, and he goes and changes the library, thinking, you know, simply that.
See, that is, as soon as you go the route of having a distributed thing, you need to stop that. And it needs to be, this is a product that we run internally in the company, and you use version 1.1. If there's a bug, you need to submit it, or there needs to be some process around deploying in the next version of that. And I'm not saying it needs to be like this huge, long process. It shouldn't hold up the development.
All I'm saying is that becomes harder to manage, because it's like, I'm going to change this guy. This is going to fix my project. It's like, oh, hang on. If I deploy it, I'm going to break your thing. Look, Bower and explicit versioning helps with that problem a lot. Where, to be honest, in my previous context, that wasn't under control adequately. But the reverse also happens. It's like, oh, we're not going to fix the bug because we can't afford to wait and go through this process. So that's the trade-off.
Right, yeah. So you could do it both ways, but I do think it's a good idea to at least separate the logger type things into, call it whatever you want, blocks.
Can I ask, do we have enough synthesis to start putting this out or not? Was it still too?
What do you mean?
No, I don't.
Because from our perspective, we don't. As in, like, I had a look, and there's nothing that I would say, you know what, this generic stuff is good enough to share with everyone else.
So we have a few that's
We've got a couple of things, like what's the comment that we used in that for a while, but it basically gives you, if you wanted to write an app that takes parameters and to check the parameters, that we've abstracted all of that. So it's very simple to write functionality for a command line app, and it will check the parameters and have defaults.
But for Angular?
No, but I mean, it's the same type of thing. Okay. And building that into a thing that can get installed with the application is quite easy. And I'm sure for Angular there will be some stuff somewhere, but
it's just because what ended up in our thing is I don't have a decent exception handler, and I don't have decent logging in our thing. Why? Because we just, like, you know, console but erroring everywhere, and that's okay for now. But I know it's
actually quite good. Keep with that.
Yeah, okay, but then what about the logging and the exception handling? Like, we've got nothing. It's kind of like a very naive implementation, I'd say, where we haven't paid respect to this problem adequately. You know? And like, what's adequately? I'm saying, well, actually, if you have a product, you need to gather stats, like what types of exceptions are occurring where, you know, and how often. And it's the automated collection, and it's all that, submit anonymous data, you know, all that kind of stuff that I'm saying, that's what deals with this adequate.
I don't think we are reinventing the wheel a lot of times. Yeah, it's emphasis. So one team will do something, another will do exactly the same thing. And maybe when you push it out to a Bower component, that will force a culture of trying to share a little bit.
The Bower thing is the word to use. I think somebody needs to just start pushing it out. If I don't like it, I won't put it in. No problem. If I like it, I'll use it. Just sort it out.
I think just that Bower is very. It's not a nice. They're still trying to find their feet, because there's zero security around stuff. But once you pushed it, the way that they're hosting their stuff in Bower is not correct. But anyway, so
Yeah, I think it's a tangent. So.
Okay, so this one is module dependencies. Application root module depends on the app-specific feature modules and any shared or reusable modules. I've been staring at this thing, trying to figure out what is he saying. I don't know if it makes sense to you guys.
The only thing I can see is that the app dashboard includes the dependencies for core and widgets as well as the app.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Look, it's a tree of dependencies. It's saying, with broad strokes, my whole app is actually just made out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas. But then he says, okay, my dashboard is actually made out of core dashboard. Well, I depend on core stuff, but I also have widgets.
So he
This one breaks
reuses
down.
that.
Sorry.
He redeclares this core and widgets in the dashboard module.
Yeah, and again, I think it's good because you're explicitly saying I'm going to be depending on the base stuff, as if
No,
you're going to lock me out.
I actually think that's bad. The reason why I'm saying that is because your active module, so that's just a composition of things, and each one of those things should have its own, it's got its own requirements, right? Because they need it, because if you just use that bottom one, that bottom module, that active dashboard, you must be able to test totally in isolation from the app module, right?
Yeah, but not the app core one. So he's not breaking his isolation thing because this guy
so
is
that,
completely
so we
Yeah.
agree that is perfectly right. But what we said just now is that the app is effectively an empty module,
Yes.
right? So why would it need core or widgets? Because it's not going to do anything.
Look, all I'm saying is that he's defined it at the highest level. He chose to say, I want my app to be seen as core and widgets.
The view might actually have like a display at the top saying, okay, cool, I'm there.
I might skip up with a few of those items because I quite frankly just don't know them that well. So let's go to startup logic. There's some interesting things here. So in Angular especially, I found there's a few things you want to do at startup. And I don't know where to do it. So let's see how he does it. Inject code into module configuration that must be configured before running the Angular app. Ideal candidates include providers and constants. Yeah, constants is definitely one that we found. And there's something like a date format that your whole application needs. So let's see where he says is the right place to do this. Yeah, we all agree that's required, right? So he does it. See where I think he moves it out to sort of a startup. See if I can find it. Should be in core, right? So he has his config and his constants in a separate file, and I'm just trying to find out where he does his startup logic. I think it's this here. Hey,
Active module? No, that's just a module, that's just a module.
it's like that.
Isn't this like a test of how good this whole thing is because we're struggling to find the constants and it's supposed to be intuitive?
Yeah, so I'm trying to find a startup and I don't know where, but it's right. So where and it's always a hard thing to find because on startup there's a lot of magic usually, and that's a pretty important one. It looks like in core. If I look at this one here, it's what do we do? Function configure. It's doing like toaster timeout options. Yeah, it's in here. So it is in the core config. Wasn't that hard to find? But I just want to see where he uses this config. Is it like a module?
So in constants, you saw where he was loading up the constants.
Just sit.
So he has it in this core module. In this core module is all the startup logic and configuration, like setting up your logger or your toaster. Toaster is a message display component. Setting up all those config, he does in one file. I think that's the first thing to notice. I just don't know how you hook it up in Angular. Does anyone know where or what? I'm unsure.
Dependency injection.
Yeah, I would
Just say toaster. You know the dollar inject or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get it.
So how is this run on Starfront?
Okay, so go to index.html. Let's just trace through the sequence of the actual boot up. Go down to the bottom. I'm sure there'll be something right at the bottom, which is like a main.
Just as an app around, there's probably an app tag.
So then, you know what, he's probably using the bootstrap.
That is his concept.
view.
He's using a
ng
config,
app.
core.config. Is that what we, so go back to,
Yeah.
So core.config is a what do you call it? Function.
Service.
No.
Factory.
What's the word?
It's
service
an Angular
module.
It's
Isolated.
not isolated.
If feature.
Self-contained.
Sorry, I'm half asleep today.
It's object configuration.
But it'll run, the minute you run config.js, that function will execute and give you all of that. And if you look in his HTML, he actually includes that and runs it.
But
So
in
it's
terms of how does this app actually start, I bet you he's going to have an ng app there somewhere.
Yes.
So he's not using the explicit boot.
I'm sure.
so there, config.js is run as part of that.
But the question is what executes, like Angular has the config phase and then the run phase. So it will gather all of the modules. So as in, by the time it gets to the ng app or the the bootstrap core of Angular, all of the modules that are ever going to be in your app have to have been loaded. So what you're talking about, James, is all of those scripts need to have been executed, and they're not in the global namespace or whatever, but they're registered in Angular. When you hit the bootstrap call in Angular, then it goes through a config phase and it says every module you have a chance to configure yourself and not define any providers and constants and all that stuff. And then I'll call run for everyone. Okay. So there's a two-phase process. Just in the index HTML, just show me where is this ng app?
ng app.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's one you're looking for.
So this hides the actual code that's in, it must be then in the Angular code, which says go and find anything with ng app and then boot it up there, and they're going to call bootstrap. But if you took that out, you'd have to go in some piece of code right at the end. You'd have to say angular.bootstrap and you point it at like your document or something. And that's what kicks off all the magic there.
Okay. So yeah, I think it's worth investigating that one a bit further. So I'm just going to skip to the top. I think we're almost out of time, but there's a few pretty easy stuff here at the beginning that I'd like to just quickly scan over. This is just some very small pieces of advice. The one is rule of one: define one component per file. And like I said, in my experience, that's a good idea. Not to have 10 controllers there in one file, but to try and stick to one controller or one component per file. Makes it easy to just look at the file, you know what's happening. Version control, that's another advantage because you don't mingle, and merging is easier. That's anything you want to add to that one.
James, what's the name? Is that the name you were?
Closure.
Yes.
What's the IIFE stand for?
Immediately load
load,
function expressions. Yeah. So this is a main JavaScript thing to do, definitely in Angular. This is how you shouldn't do it. Just spaghetti code. If you wrap it in a function, it means you're isolating that scope. So variables inside here will only have scope inside the function. So that's how normal languages actually works like that by default, but JavaScript doesn't. So in JavaScript, they do this, what they call IFEs, however you want to pronounce it, where you immediately call the function after you define it, and that means that you've isolated the scope there. Does that make sense? That's a good practice to basically always do in your JavaScript.
Yeah, and then his config, for instance, he registers it as an Angular module, which then becomes available to all your other apps by calling obviously config.whatever.
And then you can inject it rather than.
Yes.
The consequence of this is handy, because it means that you can load in your module code in any order. Because it's a subtle thing, but that's the other thing that Angular teamed up is like, because of this, they removed the thing where you had to order your script files in exactly the right sequence to get the dependencies right. So that's neat.
But why would you just go up to that again? Why would you want to isolate those two?
They're two files, so that it doesn't go in the global scope.
Okay.
So logger.js.
Still, why wouldn't you? Because all you're trying to do there is you're trying to. So the only things that you're leaking out is logger and storage, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you could have done that by just defining the inline on factory. So when you've got logger in logger, you could have just defined it as function inside of the factory, right?
Yeah, but we're trying to avoid it, so we're trying to
So
compartmentalize it.
we're trying to understand why would we want to avoid
I
that.
think
It's an anonymous function there, and you're saying that's fine.
Yeah.
I'd agree with you, but then somewhere else, he says, follow this pattern, so that when you get a stack trace, you get meaningful stack traces saying, oh, I'm in the storage function, as opposed to like anonymous.
Okay.
So
Okay, cool.
you would have, you would have deleted global with function. Yes.
But does it really matter that you are? Probably not.
So maybe this is the bad example, but there's other examples. It's just having everything global scope on, and that's what you're trying to avoid by doing this.
Okay, I'm playing devil's advocate. Why are we trying to avoid it?
Okay, I've got an answer.
So other than namespace,
Easy, because if it's global, there's a good chance that some junior developer or some new guy is going to say, I need this guy. He'll look in Chrome. It's like, oh, there's this thing in global. He'll run the code using that global dependency. And then when I try and unit test this and mock it out, then Angular hasn't got my dependency captured. So I'm going to say that it's a way to kind of enforce that only things that my module depends on and that my injection states comes in. So my code files are self-contained.
my code file, if I take that function off around it, my code file is still self-contained. The only difference is I've got a couple of variables in my global space, which is like, who cares?
Other files. So like we have this bug, there's a notify pop-up component, some jQueries and whatever.
Yeah.
And like we had code that was just popping stuff out from the middle of the code. We then changed that or go, we pulled that code out to refactor it. And it's not a dependency. And you're like, why doesn't it work? Oh, it's because I didn't load it in the right sequence. When that piece of code ran, it wasn't in global yet. So what I'm saying is that other code is referencing the global namespace, not going through Angular's mechanism. And that's right.
There's a one-liner for that one. Very briefly, it makes program state unpredictable.
you can also, I think, you
The
can also
only
follow
way
this.
that it makes it unpredictable is if there's namespace clashes in the global.
Yeah, but the load, then if your load order is correct.
Yes.
So then you have to like watch your
No,
load
no,
order.
no, no. Don't get me wrong. If you are depending on stuff being in the global space, you fail. But what I'm saying is, why should I worry about polluting the? So assume I'm doing everything right, but I just don't want to go sit and write little functions around everything because that looks horribly ugly to me. So
Use
I've-
CoffeeScript.
I love script actually. But yeah, so it does it for me. Okay. But if I am forced to work again, why would I not just drop those two? If I go and if I now in that in storage.js use logger directly, then I fail. Then me as the developer have done exactly what everybody is complaining about. But if I am good enough at making sure that that doesn't happen, and I've got tests around my things, I will know that it doesn't happen, and it will all just work. What I'm asking is, why are, other than that reason, and for namespace clashes, because that's the one I can think of, is I name something logger, you name something logger. And now we've got two different things in the global space that are the same name, and we're going to have weird issues.
So this is a constraint, right? So if you don't put this constraint on, and you put stuff in the global namespace, anybody at any point of execution can reference that. So you have no way now of like saying the only way to get to this thing is via this constraint. You have no way to constrain it.
But what we've just said is, I can still get to that. If Angular can get to it, I can get to it, because we said some junior programmer is going to sit in the Chrome debugger and is going to find the way. If you can get to it through Angular, I can get through it through the debugger. So it will just be hidden away a little bit for me, but I can still get to it. It's not like it is
hidden away in a closure.
Yeah, so
yeah, but I'll be able to get to it, because that closure needs to be accessible somewhere.
no, because you're invoking Angular from inside the closure.
And it's also about your time. So this variable will only be in scope at the time that the controller is active. So you don't, because it's a single page application, I mean, you might be using it for like an hour, and then it means variables that you declared at minute 1 will still be active way later. So if you refer to the instance of the controller. No, you are. I know you're the devil advocate, but I want to move on and leave this debate to a little longer. Just want to get through a few more stuff. Okay, so modules is just talking about naming. There you go. Avoid naming collisions. That's pretty obvious. One thing I liked about him is talking. Really is just summarized somewhere down here. I just want to find a good example. Let's rather go to code. I want to show you one. Let's see, data service maybe. Actually find a good example. But what he's saying is try to have all the bindable variables up top in your file. So everything that's bindable and on your view can access, you have it there up top, rather than scattered everywhere. You might have something here, it's assigned to the scope, might have something there. Even functions, you just declare the function up top here, and you have the implementation lower. So that means when you open a file, you can quickly, it's almost like an interface. You can quickly look at the top and you can see, all right, this dashboard controller, these are all the bindable items or elements, and these are all the functions. So it's to help you quickly identify what this file is about, what can you bind to. Yeah, he talks a lot about it. I mean, there's so many things about it. Setters and setters. Yeah, hoisting, I've seen called that.
But we skipped over this argument for why should you rather have explicit function.
Yeah, where is that?
Names is anonymous. There we go.
Oh. Yeah, like this function, so passing anonymous function is a callback. So at least of is that what you're talking about?
But you know, I think he's got another section that kind of like focuses. You know, he's got paragraphs written about this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he talks. Someone.
These are all related by these items getters and declaring the functions. Also, this controller adds syntax into sort of one concept. When you open a controller, your bindable item implementation is below, and you try to avoid. There's a lot of issues you're also avoiding. One is if you bind everything to the scope. I don't know if you've run into some reference issues somewhere where you bind the name, your views bound to that name. Maybe an array. Take an array. you lose that if you redefine it later. While push and pop in angular view will remain bound to that array. Okay, so is in JavaScript like that. With a controller like is doing it here, is saying the object the view model on this. Then you always have an object. So that choose
For your example, you could then say VM redeclare it. You can always be bound to the
that's which one I don't know. But I know it also maybe just an object.
This net function for is not this that existed declaring code. And that's all that sorts out because in your reference VM, that function is that sort by the region itself. Okay, so there's that or that. So
Yeah, that's. I like the view model one. Put on top of each other, so you can go read all of this about how you find your controller. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. I don't really have time. I just want to get through a few more. But is the session usually until when? Oh, 5.
Oh, yeah.
So we're done.
Well, we go to the whole Q&A, so.
No, we missed. So you can all go and read. It's John Popper's Angular. I can't ever go through. I try to go to the most important stuff, which I do think is your structure. That is a big. The other stuff. What we're trying to do at F3, although we haven't really started, is take every one of them, understand them, implement them sort of one by refactor where it makes sense. I think that's good going about it. But the one I start with, if I were you, is definitely that feature. Active.
I find a lot of this feels like the older way of designing your projects, the C type projects. You have your header files with the variables and that's set up front so you can see what's in there. The folder structures, they kind of came around that same paradigm of best practice. And it makes sense. I can certainly, it's the way I've always done my codes.
Especially in Angular, you can easily end up doing spaghetti code and then I'm binding to something in the view and I don't realize that it's one that's already been defined somewhere else in the controller. So having everything up top there makes it pretty easy.
Just in terms of the MVC versus a fair idea of a compromise where you might have a feature folder and then within that have your MVC splits.
I think you use it open. Like you can do what you want, like do what makes sense inside a module there. You should try and stick to the guideline, but if you have a good reason not to, like you use it open. It's a guide, it's not a.
Yeah.
You have a lot of controllers in there, but I haven't seen that happening.
What feature?
So the flats.
I've not seen an example. A structure with.
Or you might have it. You may have an MVC model, and then within the MVC you have that's specific across all three.
Yaku look to show the different structures. They advise different structures. That was one of the approaches they had.
Look, I'm a novice with Angular, so for me it's not something that I'd be able to say.
Like it breaks the principle of like you want to switch off the thing. And for me it's like you get rid of this folder and that thing is gone.
Yeah.
With the MVC script, you don't have to go here and there.
Yes.
me is what he gets right. It's like, it's one thing, so some place together. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how you reconcile it.
I see it talks about the Yeoman generator, that could be pretty interesting. And I know the JS hint and those kind of tools could help your whole team stick to once you've decided this is my naming convention or whatever. Running those tools could help you stick to it so that you have consistency. I hope this helped, guys. Sorry, you couldn't be absolutely prepared, but it was good discussions. Thank you very much.